What is SQL Azure? Hey everyone, Garth Schulte here. I want to take a MicroNugget to talk about this Azure stuff and how it applies to SQL. And Azure, if you're not familiar, is Microsoft's cloud platform. They have a ton of services sitting up there in the cloud that we can utilize and they will manage. The first thing to note about SQL Azure is it's no longer called SQL Azure. It's actually called Windows Azure SQL Database. So everything's underneath this umbrella term here, Windows Azure, which just describes all of the services that Microsoft provides for us in the cloud. We can do everything from build our entire network infrastructure in the cloud to doing something as simple as just hosting a SQL Server database in the cloud. So the reason people are going crazy about this cloud business and why it's pretty much everywhere you look and everywhere you read these days is I like to call it the Cloud Craze. Everyone's trying to skedaddle into the cloud. The reason that is because of hardware savings. We no longer have to manage hardware. We don't have to manage the cost that goes along with it, the time that goes along managing it, scaling out, high availability, fault tolerance. All that burden moves into the vendor, which in this case, with Windows Azure, is Microsoft. Now, you'll find plenty of arguments and discussions of whether that's a good or bad thing, but I'll leave that for those people that like to debate about it. I just like to use this stuff. It's fun to use. I'm going to show you how we can get in and get a SQL database up and running in the Windows Azure cloud here in a second. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the scenarios. What are some of the things we can do with SQL database in the cloud? Well, there's a lot of cool scenarios we can do. Like I said, we could move our entire network infrastructure in the cloud. We could move our entire company's technology infrastructure into the cloud, where we have our apps in the cloud that point to our databases, mobile apps, Windows apps, websites. There's just a whole slew of cloud services that I'll show you when we get up there. Or we can mix and match. We could just simply put our database in the cloud if we didn't have someone available to manage. If we're a one-man show and we didn't have the time or the power to manage an entire SQL server with a bunch of database hosted on, we could just simply put the database on the cloud where we would only be responsible for the database itself rather than the entire server and the hardware that goes along with it. So in that case, we could put our apps outside of the cloud to tap into that database. So it's a flexible platform. Now, one of the things that Microsoft did is they made it really seamless to work with their cloud using their products. In fact, if you're a DBA or a database developer or a business intelligence developer, then you can use SQL Server Management Studio locally on your desktop to tap right into the cloud and work with your SQL Server databases. Also, Visual Studio. Developers can tap right into this stuff stored in the cloud right from their development environments locally. And even applications or platforms that cannot natively work with the cloud, they still expose web services, SOAP web services, and even RESTful web services that we can tap into and work with the data stored inside of the cloud. So let me give you a demonstration to show you how easy it is to get a database up and running in the cloud and then connect to it locally from SQL Server Management Studio. So this is really your homepage. If you head over to windowsazure.com, you can create an account. You can even create a free trial that lasts 90 days. That'll give you a pretty impressive access to all of our services. So I did that. I've got a 90-day account going on here. Once you do that and you log in, you'll hit the portal button here, which will take us right in to managing all of these services here in the cloud. And it'll show us all the services that the cloud provides. So you can create websites in the cloud, you can create virtual machines, and this is really cool stuff here. If you create a virtual machine, you can do a quick create where you can specify what kind of operating system you want on there, how big your server is going to be, cores and memory wise, and then you'll set up your DNS name and you'll set up your password, and that's it. It'll spin up that instance for you. You can also use predefined ones. You can even check this out. Create one with SQL Server pre-installed on it, targeted on a Windows Server 2008 R2 machine. So you can get something up and running in the cloud really, really quick. And you can see there's a whole slew of other services to work with. Now let's hit SQL databases here, and you can create a SQL database on the fly. You can even create a SQL server on the fly up here. Let's go to databases, and if you hit create a SQL database, we can give it a name. I'm going to call this Nugget Demo DB. You can choose your edition, web, which you have 1 or 5 gigabytes, or business, where you can get all the way up to 150 gigabytes, which is pretty impressive for a 90-day trial here. Not too bad, right? So let's do that. Let's choose a 100 gigabyte database. Choose your collation, and then you can choose your server. So if you created a server on the other tab, then you could choose it here, or you can create one on the fly. So let's do that, where it'll kind of auto-generate the name of our server and everything. That's all we need to do. Now, if we hit next, we need to specify the login name. So let's call this Nugget User. We can give it a password here. Put a nice insecure password on here, and then what region you want to put it in here. I'm in the Eastern US, so I'll choose that. And then you can also allow Windows Azure Services to access the server for management purposes. So we'll leave that checked and hit complete. That's all there is to it. And look at that. We have a SQL Server database in the cloud ready to go. Now, the only thing you'll really need to do from this point is make sure that you have your IP address that you want to manage this database locally added into the firewall rules, which is really easy to do. You just click on the server. Here's the auto-generated server here. And then head into configure, and it'll be glaring at you right in front of that. I won't go in here because you'll see my IP address, and that's probably not a good thing to broadcast over the internet. But just click on this and click on add, and it'll add your IP address in there, and now you'll be able to work with this stuff locally. Now from here, if we wanted to work with this database locally in Management Studio, we can go into the database here. You can hit your show connection strings, and then any one of these that has a connection string, as you see, you'll just want to take this right here. And really all it is the name of your server, .database.windows.net, comma 1433, which is the port that SQL Server listens on. So just copy that. From there, we can fire up a local copy of SQL Server 2012 Management Studio, which I have running, so let me bring it to the forefront. Paste in that connection information, and also don't forget to enter the user credentials that you specified when we created the database and that server on the fly. We chose Nugget User. Let me put the password in, hit enter for connect, and check it out. We now have a local connection to our SQL Azure database up there in the Windows Azure cloud. Pretty cool. Now we can start working with this. We can create tables. And by the way, you will need to use Transact SQL to create your tables. The designer isn't supported, but it's possible we'll get some support for that in the future. Now, one cool thing that you can do is all of your design in the portal. In fact, if we head back into the portal and head down here to your manage URL and you click on that, this will launch us into a cool little web app that we can use to do a lot of the things that we can do in Management Studio. It's just that we can do it through a nice little web portal here. So once it fires up, you log in just as we would here to SQL Server. Type in your username that you specified when you created the database and the server. Type in the password, and that'll launch us right into it. And there we go. So this is actually a pretty cool web app because you can head down here to design, and you can design your tables using a designer, which is pretty nice. Same with your indexes, your keys, and then you can even work with putting data inside of the table here from here. On top of that, you can do views, you can do stored procedures, so you can do it all up here in this pretty simple to use application for managing and working with your database and their objects. In the CBT MicroNugget, we got familiar with SQL Azure. We saw that it's a way that we can put a SQL Server database in the cloud and put the burden of managing the hardware and the physical aspects of our database and our database servers on the vendor's shoulders, which in this case, with Windows Azure, is Microsoft. We also saw we could get one up and running using the Azure portal, and saw how easy it was to get it up and running and how we could tap into it and manage that database locally using SQL Server Management Studio. I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.